video is going to focus on how to develop architectural and structural components in SketchUp so that you can develop the structural systems and details in your model. So to start with, whenever I want to make a collection of structural pieces or shapes, I kind of just put a piece of paper on the ground and think of it like a piece of paper. First, we're going to do a set of columns. Columns by nature have an equal width to depth ratio because of the way they bear weight. So I could do a square column, and the columns in the building that we're in are like 7 inches, and they're gigantic and hold up big beams. For something like this thing, we might actually be looking at a 4-inch column or something to that effect. And I'm actually just going to draw a 3-inch square column here. But your columns, if they're steel, shouldn't be more than 6 inches. 3 inches, and then I can do 3 inches this way and 3 inches that way. And as soon as those lines go light, that means I have a profile. Next, I want to use the offset tool. And here's our offset tool. And steel has a gauge. So what I'm doing is the thickness of the gauge. And I'm going to offset that 1/4 of an inch. And there is my steel column shape. So it's already selected. I might just go ahead and copy that out to the side, but I'll leave the footprint of that piece of steel right there. And in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and paint it the color that I expect it to be, so that I don't have to paint all the sides of it later. And in this case, I'm going to call this a steel column. It's got a 1/4 inch gauge on it. And as soon as we find metal, there's metal right there. I think I'm going to give mine a rusty appearance. And I'm going to go ahead and paint both sides so I don't end up having to paint multiple sides of it later. And then I can just extrude it and give it a height. So at this point, I would probably go ahead and make that a group. If I expected to make a bunch of similar ones, I might make it a component, but for now, I'll make it a group. If I'm interested in a concrete column, concrete columns are usually a little bit bigger around because they hold steel. So a concrete column would probably be 10 inches by 10 inches by 10, and then 10 again. And I'm just going to do the same thing. I'll copy off to the side the profile, go over here, and I will give that a concrete finish on both sides. You can always change it later, but there would be a concrete column. And again, I would go ahead and group it. And concrete columns aren't hollow, so we're going to leave that one solid. There's our steel column with the gauge, and a wood column. Wood columns are somewhere in between the two in terms of size, so maybe a 6 by 6 if I want to do a timber column in this square. Or I could do a pole barn type column, which could be round, and that would have about a 3-inch diameter. So those both could be wood columns. Could also do a concrete column, and the concrete column would need to maintain 10 inches kind of across its face to contain that steel. So there's 3 pieces, and let's just go ahead and do all 3 of these at one time. So I'll use the Control key on the Select tool, and then I'll copy those off to the side, and I'll paint them. So both of those are going to be wood, and that one's going to be concrete. I've got the concrete there. Just go ahead and paint both sides. It's painting everything I've selected, but I can just deselect it and get that other bit and just a little bit. Here's wood. The wood selections in here aren't great, so you want to not pick a wood floor, but something that might have a grain. And we can rotate that pattern if it's not right. And let's just go ahead and pull those up into columns. I would group each of these individually, and just to make sure we're not selecting the one next to it. Group, and we're just going to kind of line them up here so we can kind of see collection of column options. So there's kind of a set of columns. In your project, you probably are going to choose one column and just go with that column. The second profile, and I'm going to kind of make a line on my sheet of paper here to explore those, are beams. And beams are always, maybe not always, but most of the time, they're going to be deeper than they are wide because of the way that forces act on them. We need a greater depth in a beam than we do a width in a beam. So there's a few beam shapes you need to know. We'll start with the simple ones. So if you think about residential construction, you might have a 2 by 12. A 2 by 12 isn't really 2 by 12, it's 1.5 inches. Let's try that again, 1.5 inches by 11 and 1/4 inch. You can do decimal inches in here without a problem. So that would be the profile of a 2 by 12. I might use a 4 by 8 in wood. And 4 by 8 again isn't actually 4 by 8. It is going to be 7.25 inches deep by 3.5 inches wide, or somewhere around there, depending on the kind of cut, maybe. Just go ahead and clean up some of our tails. But those are primary beam elements, and we're kind of laying the profile flat. We want to build the profile first. Another one that you might encounter a lot is steel. And in steel, we can have tube steel, which isn't round really at all. It's just a tube profile. So we might do a 4-inch by 8-inch tube steel beam. That would be a mega beam. And we would offset that. Give it a 1/4 inch thickness. That could be the profile of a piece of tube. Or I might have a 2-inch wide tube by 6 inches of depth, the longer, slender one. These sizes are kind of precise in their manufacture, and in reality you would look up the size, and I'll go ahead and give this one a 1/4 inch offset. Also, scale, here's our offset tool, 0.25 inches. And then we have wide flange shapes, and those are W shapes is what they're called. W is for the wide flange, and they're much deeper than they are wide. So we're going to do a 4-inch by, let's do a 10-inch, and I've run off my page, so let's just do that one again. Four inches across, 10 inches down, and we'll close it. So a wide flange doesn't have the hole in the middle. It's got essentially that hole distributed about the sides. and it's kind of structured in a really particular way. And we use the offset tool. We kind of want the edges to have about a 1/4 inch edge, so we'll just draw it 0.25 inches. And 0.25 inches. SketchUp is remembering what it thinks I want it to do. And then in the middle, it's usually thinner, so I'm going to go 1/8 of an inch over. And 1/8 of an inch over. There we go. And we can also do a pipe beam or a pipe column. We didn't do a pipe column over here, but I'll add one to the mix. I'll add one to the mix right after we finish this. So let's go ahead and we've got our wood out. Both of these are wood. Let's find our steel. I'll use my rusty, I'll use this steel piece, which looks like a brushed steel. I'll get each of these. And then I'm going to go ahead and select these and copy them out as before. There we go. And there we go. So kind of leave these nested in my sheet of paper. I can always come back to them later. And I'm going to extrude all of these up 10 feet. I will rotate them after they're extruded. At this point, again, in your design, you're really going to select one primary beam and one secondary beam, more than likely. I've just done an array so that you know how to build all the types. In this case, we're going to go ahead and rotate these so that I could begin to move them into my project. We might want to group them before we rotate them. You saw me, I just accidentally selected a plane, so let me go ahead and put these in individual groups. And there we go. Now we'll go ahead and select all of those groups there, and we'll rotate them into the configuration that a beam is typically supposed to be in. Now, columns are generally supposed to be under beams, which means the beam needs to sit on the column, and because of the way these are grouped, this is kind of an easier thing to deal with. But I strongly urge that you make these off to the side and then move them into place and copy them and modify them as needed. Think of your project as having a kit of parts. You don't want too many different kinds of pieces available. You want some coherency in the way that the assembly goes together. So there is columns and beams for your project. And this is the level of detail I think you should expect to get. In the next video, I'll talk about ramps and stairs and how to make those and incorporate these things together.